Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with coverage of round 5 of the 2020 Candidates Tournament. And as we did in rounds 1 to 4, we're going to look at the highlights of all 4 games, using the comments from the players themselves in their interviews after the games. These were the standings before round 5. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, Wang Hao and Jan Nepomniachtchi lead the tournament with +1. Alexander Grischuk and Fabiano Caruana have 50%. And Giri, Ding and Alexienko are on -1. And we saw some scintillating chess in round 5. These were the pairings: Giri, Caruana, Grischuk, Ding, Alexienko, Vachier-Lagrave and Nepomniachtchi against Wang Hao. The first game to finish was Kirill Alexienko with the white pieces and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave on the black side. And what a game it was. Let's put the opening moves on the board. We have a Sicilian Najdorf variation there with a6. Vachier-Lagrave had this position before with the black pieces in the Grand Chess Tour against Magnus Carlsen. And we get the exact same position on the board. Let's play to that point. G4, H takes G4 and now Rook takes G4. It's attacking the G7 pawn. In that game against Carlsen, Vachier-Lagrave had played Bishop F8 to defend the G7 pawn. But he said in his interview after the game that after Bishop G5 hitting the Queen, Queen C7 and Rook H4, White is winning. So Vachier-Lagrave did not want to repeat this. He said you can play in this position King F8 to protect G7 or even Rook H7. But he decided on G6. Alexienko knew this variation and he knew that you have to take on G6. Rook takes G6. In round 3, Alexienko had a winning sacrifice with Bishop takes G6, which he did not play. And history repeats itself, although this is not as spectacular a sacrifice as the other one was. The move is forced, said Alexienko, otherwise the white pawn structure is worse than black's. It's not that spectacular, you cannot take the rook, because then there is knight takes e6. And it's the black queen that is checkmated here. White wins black's queen and the game. So after rook takes g6, black has to do something differently. And he took on c3, also prepared by Vachier-Lagrave. Alexienko did not know this reply, and now he went in the tank for 48 minutes of thought. And he came out with knight takes e6. Another variation that was looked at, what happens if you just take that rook on c3. Then there is knight a4, hitting the queen. Queen steps aside. Then you can take the rook. Knight takes e6, hitting the queen. Queen c8. And then white has a perpetual check. This way. And the game will end in a draw. So that after rook takes c3 and taking that rook. But as mentioned, Alexienko took on e6 instead. Very spectacular. And again, it's not good to take that piece that has been sacrificed here, because after f takes e6, queen takes c3, white is better. So after knight takes e6, attacking black's queen, the queen went to c8, saving the queen. Knight g7 check, king f8 and rook h6. You can't take the knight, protecting the rook because there's queen g1 check, and this is checkmate. That was not going to happen. After rook h6, Vachier-Lagrave took the rook, bishop takes, and rook takes c2. And here rook takes d6 is an option, with more wild tactical adventures, and Alexienko did not want to go into this jungle, as he had only 10 minutes left on the clock. Instead of rook takes d6, he played knight f5 check, a discovered check from the bishop. King stepped aside, and now knight takes e7. And here Maxime Vachier-Lagrave started to think for the first time. Alexienko only had 8.5 minutes left for the next 17 moves. King takes, queen h4 check, f6 and bishop f4. With a big threat of queen h7 and also bishop takes f4. So MVL felt he had no choice but to go into this variation. Rook takes b2 check. This looks again very spectacular. And it is, but it's also logical. White takes, and now black wins the rook on d1 with knight a4 check. You cannot go to a1, for example, because then you get checkmated in 2 moves, like this. So after knight a4 check, the only move is king b1, and then knight c3 is a fork. King a1, knight takes d1, and white gave a check. King d8, queen g8 check, and king e7. Here Graf explained after the game that the only question is if white can go for the endgame here with queen takes c8. Bishop takes, and white has to take back on d1, and has the 2 bishops against bishop and knight. But there is knight e5, and MVL said this is okay for black. My king is close to the h-file, because this is the danger pawn. And he said he has the bishop h3 to g2 maneuver. And black should be okay. In the game, Alexeyenko did not go for the endgame. He gave a perpetual check, king d8, queen g8 check, king e7, and one more check, and this game was drawn after 33 moves. But what an adventure it had been. A tactical slugfest. And when I see games like this, I always get the feeling that these top grandmasters play a whole different game than I do. The second game to finish was Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces against Wang Hao with the black pieces. A clash between 2 of the tournament leaders. Nepomniachtchi had the black pieces for 3 of the first 4 rounds, and now he had white for the second time. We see a Petrov defense from Wang Hao. Again, let's put the opening moves on the board till the first interesting moment, which is here, knight a6. This was all played before in a game of Anand against Yu Yangyi, and both players knew this game, which ended in a draw. Nepomniachtchi's next move is a novelty, h2, h4. And Nepomniachtchi said after the game, from a human point of view, this is a bit annoying for black, as knight g5 is dangerous and could be unpleasant to play against. The idea is maybe more for rapid chess, but h4 is a sensible move in itself, said Nepomniachtchi. Don't think you can take that pawn on h4 twice, because then your knight on d6 is hanging. So after h4, knight c7 was played by Wang Hao, knight g5, bishop takes g5, bishop takes g5, and f6. Nepomniachtchi said he did not like this move as his knight is coming quickly to the f5 square. Like that, as we'll see. And he said he felt white is already better after only 15 moves. Bishop f4, queen d7. Let's put a few more moves on the board. Queen h3, king h8, and h5. Nepomniachtchi said I was doing clever things. And here g4, which Nepomniachtchi called a double-edged move. I'm weakening my king, the white king, but it's also very natural as I support the knight. a6, and here Nepomniachtchi said he was not happy with his next move. He played b2, b3, but then said I was mad with myself for not having played king f1 instead, a prophylactic move. He said here that black only has 2 moves. He showed king g8, and then he can play g5, which is threatening knight h6, which would win the queen. It'd be a discovered attack on that black queen on d7. So queen f7, and then g6, and black cannot take twice on g6, like this, because queen takes g6 is not check, because white has played that prophylactic move king f1, and now the black queen is just lost with knight e7 check. Nice variation. After king f1, black can also play queen e6, then queen h2, said Nepomniachtchi, and I have a lot of extra tempi. The white king will penetrate into black's position on the back rank. So all that after a6, and then king f1. But b3 was played by Nepomniachtchi, and he has said he did not like that move. Queen e6, and in some variations where the king goes to f8, Nepomniachtchi said I now don't have the check queen a3 because of that b3 move. Another reason why Nepomniachtchi really does not like that b2, b3 move. Knight back to e3, and here h6 was given by Nepomniachtchi as a safer alternative, but Wang Hao did not like it. A safer alternative for the move played in the game, which was knight d6. Because now white had h6, g6 and c4, a nice move. As Nepomniachtchi explained, black cannot take twice on c4. And why not? Well, he took once, b takes, and you cannot take again. It looks like you're winning a pawn, because the queen is also covering the knight. But there is knight takes c4, queen takes c4, and queen h2. With a mate threat. You should note that queen c1 check, and then taking that dangerous pawn on h6 is not possible, because that pawn is protected by white's queen. And let me show you the checkmate, which is very nice and instructive. Let's play a very bad move for black. Let's play a5, just to show that checkmate threat that white has. It starts with queen b8 check. There's only one move, and then queen d6, threatening to take on f6. So queen f7 to protect the f6 pawn, but then queen d8 check. You have to go back with the queen. f6 is hanging, and this is checkmate. Very nice, and this is a maneuver to remember. So after queen h2 you have to play king g8, then also queen b8 check, king f7 and queen takes b7 check, winning black's h-pawn after white's h-pawn will decide the game. White wins. That h-pawn is too strong. So all this after b takes c4 and then knight takes c4 from black, which is not possible. Wang Hao saw that and played king g8 instead, and queen h2 came anyway. Here Nepomniachtchi felt that he had great winning chances. Black has to defend like a computer, and then he might be able to hold the position. But for a human, Nepomniachtchi thought this was very difficult to defend. King f7, c5 kicking the knight, knight b5, queen b8, we see that move again, infiltrating into black's position. And here queen e7 was the move, as the players agreed after the game. But queen d7 was played by Wang Hao, and that is a blunder. Knight takes d4 is the engine's choice, which is also a move that would hold the position for black. But queen d7 is not a good move. Nepomniachtchi played queen h8, threatening to take on h7. So king e6 to protect the h-pawn. And then f4 from Nepomniachtchi. Wang Hao took on d4, a check, the queen interposed, and here Nepomniachtchi repeated the moves to get closer to move 40. And now he played queen d8, and this move was missed a number of moves ago by Wang Hao. And he said with a smile in his interview after the game, how could this move happen? For starters, it's attacking the knight. After knight b5 there is a4, and that's winning for white. In the game after queen d8, Wang Hao played queen d7 to save his knight. And now there was f5 check. And this wins a piece for white. As we'll see, g takes f5, g takes f5 check, knight takes is the only move not to lose the queen. But then queen takes d7 check, king takes, and now the knight on f5 is unprotected. King e6, knight back to e3, and Wang Hao resigned. He was not in the mood to have Nepomniachtchi show his technique by winning this endgame with a piece against two pawns. Great win for Nepomniachtchi and a very rich and interesting game, and the variations that the players showed I thought were very nice, beautiful and also very instructive. And now let's have a look at the third game of round 5. Alexander Grischuk with the white pieces against Ding Liren on the black side. And let's go through the opening. It is a Spanish opening, a complicated line in the Spanish. And the first interesting moment is here. d7, d6 was played by Ding in round 2 against Maxime Verchet-Lagrave, and he said he had forgotten his preparation. And he played d5 this time instead of d6. That pawn was taken, knight takes, and let's put some more moves on the board to see how this game went. A takes b5, a takes b5, and now Grischuk brings a spectacular looking piece sacrifice which is not really a sacrifice as he wins the piece back with a fork straight away, but it looks quite spectacular. He took on c5 with the knight, knight takes c5. You can take with the bishop, then bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, and then we have b4. Forking two pieces, winning the piece back. Rook c6 and b takes a5, and this is about equal. Also quite interesting and instructive that in this position Ding did not take with the bishop, he took with the rook. What is that? Can you now just not take that rook? You can, but after bishop takes c5 there is no b2, b4 fork anymore. And this is a nice position for black with two pieces for the rook. Again, very instructive. After rook takes c5, therefore Grisuk did not take the rook, he played b4 straight away. Should also note that the knight cannot take that pawn because it's pinned. So the rook dropped back, b takes a5, and we have an equal position. King h8, bishop d2, and knight b4. Ding said he was very happy to find this move and the next one, which was bishop d5. He felt he had equalized now. Bishop takes, queen takes, and rook c1. A very good move, otherwise white might be worse, said Ding. Here he has different options. He mentioned rook takes a5, but then there is knight takes e5, another piece sacrifice. But then f takes e5 and queen g4 with a double attack on the rook and also on the knight, winning material back. And Ding said this is very dangerous for black. Another thing that Ding looked at after rook c1 was knight a2, but then he said c4 is possible. And he said, I decided to go for the most safe line with no winning chances for white. After rook c1 he played knight c6. c4, b takes c4, and let's show the moves that happened. The position is equal and remains equal. As we'll see, white avoids queen and rook exchanges on many moves, but he's not making any progress. Grisuk did not want to swap rooks. Clearly, he did not want to swap queens either. He played on, but he was not going to win this position against a strong player like Ding Liren. Finally, Grisuk agreed to swap the queens and make a draw. More moves were played. This is move 52. And rook a7. And this was the last move of the game, and this game was drawn. Grisuk said it was a very good game, but not a very interesting one. And he also expressed a strong opinion that he thinks the tournament should be stopped and postponed because of the situation with the coronavirus. Grisuk said, I don't want to be here, I don't want to play. But at the same time, he also made it clear that he's not going to withdraw. We don't have to be afraid of that. So far we had 2 draws and that nice win for Nepomniachtchi. Let's look at the last game from round 5. Anish Giri with the white pieces against Fabiano Caruana. And in this game we saw the Slav defense with e3, which means that black can put the bishop outside of the pawn chain. e6, knight h4, chasing that bishop. f3, bishop g6. The bishop gets taken, so white has the bishop pair. And queen c2. Caruana said here, I was surprised to see the queen c2 line. I knew it existed, but usually queen to b3 to this square is played. Queen c2 is quite rare. I knew something about it, but did not remember exactly how to play. I had to improvise with knight d7, b6 and queen b8, and it didn't really work out. My position was bad throughout the game. Let's see how Caruana improvised. And there goes the queen to b8. Giri said Caruana wanted to be clever with queen b8, but after h4, this move, there is no longer a point of queen b8, as the pawn on h2 is no longer attacked twice by queen and rook. That pawn is gone. And Giri said if black plays knight h5 here, to jump into that hole on g3, then there is knight e2, keeping the knight out. In the game after h4, Caruana played g5, bishop e1, and Giri said, I have already a very pleasant position here. g4, And Geary played e4. He said bishop e2 was maybe more practical, but what I played also looked good. Let's go through the moves. What happened after this? I'm just going through these moves. The players did not really have any comments on these moves. And here c5 was played. Knight f6 was better according to Caruana. He did not like the move he played in the game c5, because now bishop c3, and Caruana says here I'm borderline lost. C takes, bishop takes, and bishop f6. And Geary said this should be very, very bad, but it turned out not to be easy to win over the board. I could not calculate a winning line till the end. Geary took on f6, knight takes, and we see the moves after that. And here d4. Geary said I allowed this move, and then the knight came to d5. And it turned out it was not so much for me after that. Geary felt he had let slip his advantage. Rook e5, and Caruana said now I have only one way not to lose, which is knight g4, hitting that rook, rook c5, and knight e3 with a fork on white's heavy pieces. And there's only one way out for white, but that leads to an equal position. Rook c8 check, rook takes, queen takes, king e7, and now white saves the rook, but this position is equal, and we saw a move repetition. This is the 42nd move, rook c1, and the players shook hands. This game ended in a draw. That was a very interesting round 5, some very rich and spectacular games. 3 draws and a win for Jan Nepomniachtchi, who now leads the way after 5 rounds with 3.5 points. Vasyl Graf is half a point behind, and there are 3 players on 50%. Wang Hao, Fabiano Caruana, and Alexander Grishuk, who has made 5 draws. -1 for Alexienko, Geary and Ding. They are still not out of it by any means. Round 6 will be played on Monday the 23rd of March, and we'll see Grishuk against Caruana, Alexienko Geary, Nepomniachtchi Ding, and Wang Hao against Vasyl Graf. I will be here after the round to tell you what happens. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you like this video, if you like my coverage of the Candidates Tournament, then please share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.